Welcome to the commentary track for Shout Factory's release of the uncut Death Wish 2. My name is Paul Talbot. I'm the author of the books Bronson's Loose and Bronson's Loose Again. I'm obsessed with the Death Wish movies, and I'm going to deliver some trivia behind this one. When I first saw this movie, it opened with the Filmways logo. They distributed the movie in the States. This is a Cannon Films production, but we don't see the famous Cannon logo at the beginning. The famous Cannon logo wouldn't appear in a Bronson movie until Death Wish 3. Death Wish 2 opens with shots of Los Angeles, California. The screenplay was written to be set in San Francisco. The idea was to contrast the picture postcard quality of San Francisco with the dark brutality of the violence. But for budget reasons, the film was made in the Los Angeles area. We're hearing an instrumental version of the Jimmy Page song Who's to Blame. On the soundtrack album, this track has vocals by Chris Farlow. This song was not released as an official single, but it was played on FM rock radio stations at the time. We hear Jill Ireland as journalist Jerry Nichols reading crime statistics on the radio. The information she's reading were actual crime statistics for San Francisco. The statistics were not rewritten when the production location was changed to L.A. Jill Ireland was Bronson's real-life wife. Credited as an editor is Arnold Crust. Arnold Crust was a pseudonym for director Michael Winner. Winner taught himself to edit while making short films after graduating college, and he personally edited almost all of his features. 2 directors of photography are credited because one of them quit. More about that later. Executive producers Hal Landers and Bobby Roberts had discovered the Death Wish novel back in 1972 and produced the original film. Michael Winner does not receive a writing or producing credit, but he wrote the final draft and he was the actual on-set producer. Cannon head Menahem Golan intended to direct this movie himself, but Charles Bronson would only agree to make a sequel if it was directed by Winner, who had helmed the original. And as Winner's directing credit appears, we get a trademark Winner zoom into the first scene. This film was shot entirely at real locations. With very few exceptions, Winner shot all of the scenes for all of his movies on actual locations, not on constructed sets. We are in the home of former vigilante Paul Kersey, played once again by Charles Bronson. We see Silvana Gallardo as his housekeeper Rosario. Her role was not in the original script. The character was created by Winner. Prior to this, Gallardo had been on Broadway, and her screen credits included the TV miniseries Centennial and the TV show Falcon Crest. She had been an extra in one scene of the original Death Wish. Rosario was described in the script as being in her early 40s. Gallardo was only in her late 20s, so her hair and makeup were done to make her look older. When we last saw vigilante architect Paul Kersey, he was banished from New York City, and it looked like he was going to continue his vigilante ways in Chicago. This sequel doesn't tell us what happened in Chicago, but now he is in Los Angeles and is dating the journalist we just heard on the radio. Here is Robin Sherwood as Kersey's daughter Carol. This role was played by Kathleen Tolan in the original Death Wish. For the sequel, over 100 actresses auditioned for the role before Sherwood was cast. This doctor is played by Robert Snively, who had a small role in Bronson and Winner's The Stone Killer. This movie was shot 7 years after the original Death Wish, but Kersey tells the doctor that it's been 2 years since Carol's attack. Later in the movie, we hear conflicting dates about the time frame. In the original Death Wish, Carol had a husband who engaged in some philosophical conversations with Kersey, but the son-in-law is not in this sequel, and we don't learn what happened to him. This street fair sequence was filmed on Olvera Street, a historic Mexican marketplace created in 1930 in downtown Los Angeles. The Mariachi Band was a real band that played there to add to the atmosphere. Bronson's jacket is a members-only type jacket that was very popular at the time. It doesn't have the members-only label on the pocket. I don't know if he's wearing a knockoff or if the label was removed to prevent free advertising. There was a sequence here that was shot but deleted where Carol watches a Punch and Judy puppet show, and she looks disturbed when the puppets beat each other. Here we meet our 4 villains for the first time, with their boombox playing the track Jam Sandwich. In a note, Menahem Golan wrote that he wanted the muggers played by, quote, 4 men in different races, unquote. And we do have 4 different physical types playing the roles. Each of these actors were handsome in reality, but were made up and costumed to look scary. I'll discuss each actor later. In Death Wish 3, Kersey would again have a violent encounter while trying to buy an ice cream. Kevin Major Howard as Stomper screams and pounds his fist to his head. Howard once heard a guy scream like that when the guy's appendix burst. Howard got the head pounding inspiration from a punk rock drummer who would pound his head after each drum beat.
That's nice.
Bronson chasing Jiver was shot much later than the previous scene, in an alley that was in a different part of downtown LA than the marketplace. Stuart K. Robinson, who played Jiver, came from a dirt-poor farm family. Prior to this, he did Shakespeare in the Park and TV commercials, and was in Sylvester Stallone's Paradise Alley and Rocky II. Jiver has on baggy pants that display his colored boxers. This was one of the first films that displayed that look. Bronson was involved with staging the action scenes on all of his movies. It was his idea for Kersey to disarm Jiver by having the knife get stuck in a cardboard box. Kersey uses his fist in this movie. In the first Death Wish, he did not have any hand-to-hand encounters.
Guess what?
We see Carol looking at a glass cat. Winter had visited Sherwood's apartment during pre-production, and he saw that she had 2 cats and a glass collection, so he added a glass cat figure to the movie. In this marina scene, the boat captain is played by Ransom Walrod, who actually owned the boat that was used. He worked behind the scenes as a boat coordinator on many movies, including the later Cannon Bronson vehicle Assassination. This marina scene was shot on the same day as the later funeral scene. Death Wish 2 had a convoluted history. After the first Death Wish movie was a hit, novelist Brian Garfield published a sequel book called Death Sentence, which was submitted to Bronson, Winter, and Dino De Laurentiis, who had produced the first movie. But they all passed on it, as did several other studios. At one point, Cannon was going to call this movie Death Sentence when they couldn't get the rights to the Death Wish title, even though the premise of this movie is nothing like the premise in the Death Sentence novel. More interaction between Kersey and Carol on the boat was shot but deleted. The gang shows up at Kersey's residence in a 1971 Chevy van. The location used for Kersey's residence is on Crescent Heights Boulevard in Los Angeles. The location is now a law office, but it still looks the same. You can see the actual street number here. Some Death Wish fans get their picture taken in front of the location. The script that was set in San Francisco called for the residence to be near the famous Coit Tower. We hear some creepy music played on synthesizer by Page. According to the script, these guys are smoking angel dust, not pot. Nirvana has a knife strapped to his ankle with a bandana, although he never uses the knife in the movie. Sylvana Galato recorded that for her Death Wish 2 audition, Winter didn't have her read anything. He just had her sit in a chair while he walked around the chair and asked her questions to see what her reaction would be. She was very reluctant to take the role because of the rape scene, but Winter was insistent. She'd already played the real-life rape victim Inez Garcia in a TV movie, but that movie was nowhere near as intense as Death Wish 2. The soap opera that she watches was actually shot for the film by Winter. It was not an existing production. We see Kevin Major Howard as Stomper on the porch. For the film, Howard shaved his forehead and waxed off his eyebrows and got his eyelashes dyed blue.
Who is it?
I got a delivery from Mr. Kersey.
Who from? Who is this delivery from?
He has gold crosses on his lapel. He'll have a larger cross around his neck in a famous later scene. The rape scene in the original Death Wish was one of the most brutal ever seen in a mainstream film, and it had stunned and sickened audiences, but it was tame compared to what Winter shot for this sequel. Winter said that he made the rape scene so graphic because he needed the audience to feel intense hatred towards the villains, so that they would identify with Kersey's vengeance. Again, the Rosario character and her rape were created entirely by Winter. In his screenplay draft, this rape scene takes up 3 pages and is very detailed. About a minute was cut from this scene to get an R rating in the States, and the scene was cut even further for England, Germany, and other countries. In Japan, the rape scenes were uncut, but the glimpses of genitalia were optically fogged. When he was auditioning actors to play these villains, Winter had them pretend to be raping a chair. Gallardo recalled that Winter was very eccentric, but also very charming. She said that the action in the rape scene was mostly improvised, and that she was crying and screaming for real. Among the images cut here for the R version were Punkuk licking Rosario and Jiver thrusting so hard that his bandana falls off. In the R version, his bandana just disappears. In the edited versions, reaction shots of the gang members were used to replace images that were cut. The facial expressions on the gang members are often cartoonish, but Gallardo's performance is 100% realistic.
My turn now, man.
Water, take her in the bedroom. Driver, check out the window for the man.
In this uncut version, we see Laurence Fishburne as Cutter, using his belt as a whip. Between takes, he would walk around whipping the furniture to keep in character. In the bedroom rape in the R-rated version, once Rosario's bra is ripped off, almost all of the scene is cut until the point where Nirvana enters the room later. In this uncut version, we see Stomper kissing Rosario, and the actor actually gave her a romantic-style kiss, which added to the tastelessness of the scene. The scene reportedly took 6 days to shoot. At the end of each day, Gallardo was mentally and emotionally exhausted and was black and blue. One of the male actors actually threw up because he was so upset by playing the role. At the end of each day, the male actors would console and hug Gallardo. Thomas Del Ruth, the initial director of photography, was so appalled by how much Winter was dwelling on the rape that he and his crew actually quit the film at this point. Writer David Engelbach, who only saw the R-rated cut, was so absolutely disgusted by this scene that he considered taking his name off the film. The R-rated version does have 2 very brief shots that are not in the unrated version. There's a medium shot of Nirvana and Jiver sitting in the living room, and there's a close-up of Nirvana smacking his palm with the tire iron. The R-rated version of this scene does not end with the image of Rosario getting her face thrust into Nirvana's crotch. The R-rated cut ends with a close-up of Cutter saying, "All right now, lady, quietly, do it nice." In the first Death Wish, Kersey lived in New York City. Like many New Yorkers, he didn't own a vehicle and got around via taxi or subway. Now that he's in LA, he has a 1981 Ford Thunderbird. Robin Sherwood had been a model since age 14. Her prior movies included Tourist Trap and Blowout, where she played one of the screamers auditioned by John Travolta. She didn't watch the first Death Wish prior to doing the sequel, because she wanted to give her own interpretation of the character and didn't want to copy Kathleen Tolan's performance. Winter designed her haircut for Death Wish 2 and didn't allow her to wear any makeup in the movie.
Rosaria, you're home.
Here's another fight scene that Bronson helped to stage. He always wanted his fights to be realistic and didn't mind having his character strike an adversary in the testicles, as he does here to Stomper. Rosario's death was more brutal in the script, where Winter wrote, quote, "The bar crashes into the side of her head, splitting it open and rocking her against the wall. Her head is burst open. She sags down the wall, leaving a messy trail of blood," unquote. The shot of Rosario's dead body was shortened for the R version, and it was cropped in the British version, so her pubic area would not be shown. After this movie, Silvana Gallardo did a lot of work on TV including the movie Copacabana with Barry Manilow. She was also a respected acting instructor, and her students included Angelina Jolie. She died in 2012. We see here a Nagra tape recorder. At the time, this was a very sophisticated piece of portable recording equipment used to record analog audio. The senator is played by Paul Comey, who was in dozens of TV episodes in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. This scene has examples of the odd camera angles that Winter often favored. We see the Sherry van now parked outside a warehouse with an iron fence around it. Now we come to the second notorious rape scene in the film. It took a week of night shooting to complete this scene. Robin Sherwood never met or saw the actors who played the rapist until they showed up on the set. These actors playing the villains were all method actors, and they stayed in character as an isolated unit between takes. Sherwood was intimidated and frightened by these actors, and she stayed away from them on the set. In the original script, the daughter was not raped. In that script, after the muggers surround her, she has a flashback to when she was assaulted in the first film, and then she breaks free and jumps out the window. In the R-rated version, this scene cuts from the close-up of Carol's legs being spread by Punk Cut to a cutaway scene of the Jill Island character going to Kersey's home. Over a minute was cut from this scene for the R version. The uncut version has very brief glances of both male and female frontal nudity. There was no music during the first rape scene, but this one has some eerie synthesizer music that adds to the creepiness. Sherwood wasn't expecting for Winter to make the scene as graphic as he did. The scene was extremely difficult for her. E. Lamont Johnson plays Punk Cut. Previously, Johnson played a gang member with Joey Travolta in Sunnyside. He played a police detective in Foxes, another movie that showed the sleazy part of L.A., and he had his best role as Henry Fonda's biracial grandson in the TV miniseries Roots: The Next Generation. In the edited versions, the leering close-ups of the gang members and the shot of Stomper tapping wood with his knife were used to cover the shots that were censored, and some of those creepy close-ups were also used in the trailer. Laurence Fishburne III played Cutter, the one with the pink sunglasses. Of the actors playing the muggers, he was the most experienced. He was a child actor in movies like Cornbread Earl and Me, and he was in Apocalypse Now. The odd jewelry worn by these actors was material that they found for themselves. After these actors were cast, Winter told them to come up with their own concept for the characters, and they chose their own costumes, hairstyles, and accessories. Chato's Land, the first movie that Bronson and Winter had made together, also had a brutal gang rape sequence that had to be cut down to the states and other territories. Winter recalled that none of the rape scenes in his Death Wish movies were difficult to shoot, and that the actors were joking between takes. Death Wish 4 and 5, which were made without Winter, do not contain rape scenes. The R-rated version, after cutting away to the scene of Jill Island at Kersey's home, resumes here with the close-up of Jiver reacting before he starts to take down his pants. The script called for Carol to break her silence by screaming before jumping out the window, but Sherwood argued that her character wouldn't be strong enough to scream. The close-up of Carol with blood gushing from her mouth and the medium shot of her impaled on the fence are cut from the R-rated version. We'll see other characters with blood gushing from their mouths later in the film. Here we see Jerry coming to the Kersey residence. For the R-rated version, this is the footage that was intercut with the previous rape scene. Now from this point on, the unrated cut and the R-rated cut are exactly the same. Some fans have claimed that most of the upcoming scenes of violence were cut down to get an R rating, but that is not correct. From this point on, there is no difference between the R-rated cut and Winter's intended final cut. Death Wish 2 was shot in 44 days beginning in May 1981. Canada exaggerated that the budget was $8 to $10 million, but it was actually around $2.5 million, plus Bronson's $1.5 million fee. We see a cop dusting a glass frame for fingerprints. None of the rapists had exposed fingers, and this house would have been full of fingerprints. They all certainly had extensive criminal records and should have been easy to catch. Lieutenant Mankiewicz is played by Ben Frank, originally from New York. He was a former prize fighter, and he was in episodes of almost all of the classic TV cop shows of the 1970s. He played a similar detective in the slasher movie Don't Answer the Phone, and he played the pervert who tries to molest Cherie Curry at the end of Foxes. Michael Winner claimed to have been mugged 3 times himself in real life. The police in all 3 of Winner's Death Wish movies are mostly ineffective, but Winner was not anti-police. He was one of the founders of a British organization that erects memorials in honor of police officers killed in the line of duty. All of the scenes shot inside and outside of the Kersey residence were among the first shot for the movie.
Some muggers followed my wife and daughter home from the market. The police there got a very good description of the muggers, too. But it didn't do any good.
We do what we can. Oh, one of my men found this on the floor.
Oh, honey, if they don't need us anymore, let's go back to my place. They're going to be all night.
Mr. Kersey, we just got some news about your daughter.
How is she?
After Death Wish 2, Robin Sherwood continued to date Michael Winner for a period. Death Wish 2 was her last movie. She later became an entrepreneur and a writer. We see Jerry reacting to the body, but even after seeing the brutalized corpses of Rosario and Carol, Jerry still believes in the rehabilitation of criminals. As Kersey looks at his daughter's glass figurine, we hear Carol's theme, which was written by Jimmy Page on a keyboard. Then it was arranged for and performed by an orchestra.
Let's stay here a while. I'll be along in a moment.
This funeral scene was filmed at Angelus Rosedale Cemetery in the historic West Adams district of Los Angeles. It was the first cemetery in L.A. to be open to all races and religions. African-American actress Hattie McDaniel from Gone with the Wind and Asian-American actress Anna Mae Wong are buried there. A number of other movies were shot there, including the later rape and revenge movie Savage Streets with Linda Blair. This scene was shot later in the day, on the same day as the marina scene we saw earlier. Robert F. Lyons, who we'll see later, was supposed to be in this scene, but he was fired by Winner that day. Bronson's movie wardrobe was always specially tailored for him, and he usually had it in his contract that he got to keep his wardrobe. Bronson gets into a 1977 Cadillac Fleetwood limousine. We see Kersey on retreat. This point is where the film differs the most from David Engelbach's original script. In that version, Kersey goes to stay at a cabin in Ben Sur on the coast of California. In the middle of the night, he's awakened by automatic gunshots. He goes outside to investigate, and he's captured by a group of survivalists. They recognize him from newspaper stories about his daughter, so they take him to their warehouse where they provide him with several automatic weapons and body armor. Kersey goes back to the city, equipped to track and battle the villains. But that entire vignette was cut for budget reasons. In real life, chopping wood was part of Bronson's fitness routine. He would chop his own firewood when he stayed at his farm in Vermont. And now Kersey has decided to become the vigilante once again. We hear Carol's theme as Kersey thinks about his daughter.
This is the new model, Paul.
We see Kersey at work as an architect, as he was in the first film. In this original script, Kersey was no longer an architect. He had become a radio station manager. He had left his architect career behind, just as he had left the vigilante behind. Winner decided to make him an architect again, but he kept the radio station's setting by having Kersey be the designer of the station's new building. That's Robert Lyons in the safari-type jacket playing the radio station manager. He doesn't have much of a part in this movie, but he started his movie career as one of the best young actors of the early 70s, in movies like Getting Straight, The Todd Killings, and Dealing. Bronson liked Lyons' early work and wanted him to play the apprentice and the mechanic, but Michael Winner chose Jan Michael Vincent for that role. Jimmy Page wrote a few songs with vocal tracks that were to be heard in the background of the radio station scenes, but none of those songs ended up being used in the film. One of them was actually a country song called Country Sandwich, and it can be heard on an extended CD of the score that Page released himself. Kersey's friend Elliot Cass is played by Michael Prince. He's best known for putting the Force together in the martial arts movie Force 5 and for playing the Dean on the Paper Chase TV series. He was 59 when he made this movie, the same age as Bronson. Bronson was 5'8", and he never wore lifts to make himself look taller. Ireland, at 5'7", was almost as tall as him. Winner's previous movie, Firepower, was supposed to star Bronson with Sophia Loren, but she was the exact same height as Bronson when she was barefoot, and she always wore heels on screen. Some say that's the reason Bronson dropped out of that movie. Here's Lieutenant Mankiewicz again. In the original script, the police were not doing any investigating because the rape and murder of the maid was not in that script, and because the daughter was mentally unstable and had apparently committed suicide. In the original Death Wish, Kersey used a .32 caliber Colt revolver with a pearl handle and a 4-inch barrel, but that gun was confiscated by Inspector Ochoa. Now Kersey has a Beretta Model 84 9mm, an excellent Italian-made, very popular handgun. It has a double-stack magazine that holds 13 rounds of ammunition. In the original script, Kersey got this gun and some other weapons from the survivalists. But in the final film, we don't learn where Kersey got this gun. This is the famous Pioneer Chicken on Northwestern in Hollywood. This restaurant was also seen in the Cannon movie The Last American Version and in DeBarge's musical video for Rhythm of the Night, which was seen in The Last Dragon. We see a strange new wave kid with blood on his mouth. Winner was a connoisseur of all types of food, including American fast food, and he would go to the Pioneer Chicken drive-thru when he was in LA. As in the first movie, the first crime seen by Kersey is the vandalism of a car, and he would encounter car vandals again in Death Wish 3. Like Clark Kent going into a phone booth to change into Superman, Kersey goes into a toilet stall to change into the Vigilante. The graffiti on the wall is all real. It wasn't added by the crew. The wool cap he wears was actually described in Engelbach's first draft of the script. Now that Kersey has changed into his Vigilante disguise, we see his shadow on the wall for the first time. This was an idea that Engelbach wrote into the script. Now that Kersey has decided to become a vigilante again, he has lost all of his humanity and is just a dark, soulless shadow. We'll see the vigilante shadow throughout the film. When the script was set in San Francisco, at this point Kersey was to travel through North Beach, Turk Street, and Washington Square. But in the final film, he's in the Skid Row area of downtown Los Angeles. The people we see in this scene were actual Skid Row street people, including drug addicts and prostitutes, who were wandering the area and were chosen by Winner to be in the film. There are some professional actors in this scene, including the pimp that we see shaking the hooker. We see some rescue missions. These are actual rescue missions. Then Kersey comes to the notorious Southern Hotel at 412 East 5th Avenue in Skid Row. This landlord is played by Peter Pan, a Chinese immigrant who ran a business in this area for many years. He retired from his business when he was almost 80, then started doing movie bit roles, with Death Wish 2 being one of his first. He did small movie roles for the last 10 years of his life until he died in 1990. Southern Hotel was built in 1910 as a hotel for people traveling on the Southern Pacific Railroad, which had a depot nearby. At the time of Death Wish 2, it was still an operating hotel, even though it was considered to be the worst slum in Los Angeles. and it was in violation of numerous safety and fire codes. The pipes leaked, and the place reeked of dripping sewage and rotting mattresses. Skid Row has one of the largest homeless populations in the U.S. Over 8,000 homeless people live there.
Shall I join?
Kersey is wearing the same type of pajamas as he had in the original Death Wish.
Well, who were you expecting?
Death Wish 2 was the 15th movie that Jill Ireland made with Bronson. She first met Bronson in 1963 on the set of The Great Escape, which co-starred her then-husband, David McCallum. Her first role in a Bronson movie was a bit in Villa Rides. Then Bronson started getting her feature roles.
I'm getting very bored with
When he
wearing
did
the
Someone
outline.
Behind the Door in 1971, he insisted that the producers cast her as the female lead. Later, Bronson threatened to walk off of The Mechanic if his wife didn't get a role. And director Michael Ritchie quit Breakout when Bronson insisted that Ireland play the female lead. By all accounts, the Bronsons adored each other.
Hello, yes. I have some locks here that need changing. Could you do it for me today, please?
All of the nighttime street exteriors were shot by Richard H. Klein, who took over the photography chores when Thomas Del Ruth quit after shooting about one-third of the movie. Klein had been nominated for Oscars for Camelot and the King Kong remake. He had shot the Hawaii and Arizona segments of the first Death Wish, and he had shot Winters the Mechanic and Wonton Ton and Bronson's Mr. Majestic. Klein was much more experienced and expensive than Del Ruth, but he took the last-minute Death Wish 2 gig for a lower fee because he had a window in his schedule and he had enjoyed working with Winter previously. These Hare Krishna were a real religious group that hung around the area. Hare Krishna are also seen in other movies of this era set on Hollywood Boulevard like Roller Boogie and Angel. The first Death Wish was unusual for a revenge movie because Kersey never caught the actual criminals who had assaulted his wife and daughter. The sequel follows a more traditional formula by having Kersey stalk specific criminals. Here Kersey spots Stomper, played by Kevin Major Howard. Again, the original script was set in San Francisco, where there's not as many places where people congregate like in Los Angeles. It's kind of unbelievable that Kersey could easily track down the 5 villains in an area as large and as spread out as L.A. Stomper is now working with a different group of criminals than the gang we saw him with earlier. These are real Hell's Angels, and you can see one of the bikers deliberately bump into Howard. Prior to this, Howard had only a handful of television roles. He did extensive preparation for his Death Wish 2 role. Prior to filming, he would walk down Hollywood Boulevard in costume and in character and scare the pedestrians. This scene was originally written to take place at City of Paris department store, a huge building in San Francisco that had recently closed. It was one of the largest open-air drug markets in the world. The actual location used is the Garden Court Apartments on Hollywood Boulevard, which had 190 rooms and was built in 1917. In the late teens, early 20s, it was the largest and most elegant hotel in Hollywood, and screen legends like Clara Bow, Rudolph Valentino, and John Gilbert kept apartments there. Silent comedians Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd each filmed a scene outside the hotel. In the 60s, it started to decay, and it was vacated in 1980. During the vacant era, it was nicknamed Hotel Hell, and at the time of Death Wish 2, 54 drug-addicted teens were found squatting in the building. The hotel was finally demolished in 1984. This building really was infested with rats, but the rodents seen in the film were trained rats hired by the filmmakers. We hear the track Hotel Rats and Photostats, played by Page on synthesizer. The lighting in this scene was designed to appear that the room is illuminated by that one lamp. You can see a rat clinging to the lampshade.
You and you out.
I never understood why Kersey let those two guys go. The graffiti on the wall was not added by the filmmakers. Obviously, some of the homeless kids that lived there were fans of the punk rock group The Germs. This Do You Believe in Jesus vignette is one of the highlights of the film. Theatrical audiences always cheered loudly during that moment in the trailer and in the film. It looks like liquid smoke was put on the gun. After Death Wish 2, Kevin Major Howard was in movies like Sudden Impact and Full Metal Jacket. Today, Howard is a still photographer. Here we see real-life members of the Guardian Angels, a volunteer group that prowls the streets to make them safer. The night scenes were filmed from 6 o'clock p.m. until 5 o'clock a.m. During the late-night exterior shoots, the crew often heard gunshots, and one night a real-life creep prowled nearby, carrying a club with nails sticking out of it. Each evening, 20 off-duty, gun-toting men from LAPD were hired to serve as security for the set. We hear the song City Sirens, the only vocal track heard in the film. The vocals are by Gordon Edwards from the band Pretty Things. He also plays electric piano on some parts of the soundtrack. This song became a standard of Page's live sets. He played it live when he was in The Firm. He also played it live with Steve Winwood on vocals. In the first Death Wish, on the first night Kersey kills someone, he passes a group of people partying outside with balloons, and that also happens in this movie on the first night he kills someone. The party woman that Kersey just passed by is Grindhouse drive-in legend Roberta Collins from The Big Doll House, Caged Heat, and Death Race 2000.
Hello.
You're in.
Did you know night?
Called.
I haven't been answering the phone. Those newspaper people keep calling me ever since. Well, I just haven't been answering.
Can I cook dinner for you tomorrow night?
Friday night's better.
Friday night then.
Okay.
As in the first film, Kersey seems happy and relieved after his first murder. Also, like the first film, he watches TV news reports of his own exploits. This singing drag queen was discovered by Winter when she yelled out a window at him. Shortly after filming, she had to be rushed to the hospital when her lover shot her in the buttocks. That guy dressed like a cowboy was a real-life hustler who sold photo ops to tourists. We hear a news report. In early drafts of the script, when Kersey was the radio station manager, he was pressuring his staff to focus more on local news. That's why he says, "That's it, kiddo. Give him the local news." Like most movies of this era set on Hollywood Boulevard, we have a scene with a teen prostitute. The actress is unbilled, and I don't know her name. Kersey, as the father of a doomed daughter, seems concerned about her, but he doesn't have time to focus on helping her. We see the Chinese landlord again, and we hear an actual recording from one of the mission's revival meetings. Kersey has an extensive wardrobe and has on a different casual windbreaker than the members-only jacket we'd seen him in before. We didn't see him buy any bullets, but his Beretta is loaded fully with 13 rounds. Kersey would again appear in an arcade while stalking his adversaries in Death Wish 4. By coincidence, Kersey hears a scream, which leads him straight to one of the guys he's looking for. Jiver is working with 3 different bad guys than the 3 we first saw him with. We have yet another rape scene, but this time it happens behind the closed doors of a 1977 Dodge Trademan van, and we don't see it. The guy that gets away is not Nirvana, although he has a similar cap. It's unsatisfying that that guy gets away. Winnie uses yet another opportunity to show bare breasts. This is a well-done action sequence with dolly shots and lots of cuts. Winner was an underrated master of action scenes. They were always well staged and easy to follow. Kersey picks up a Colt Model 1903 pocket hammerless pistol. This is a .32 caliber semi-automatic pistol made in Connecticut. It holds 8 rounds and was a favorite of Al Capone and John Dillinger. Kersey now has 2 guns. His Beretta only has a few shots left. We saw 1 shot fired from the gun he picked up, but we don't know how many it was loaded with. There was no music prior to this in the scene, but a synthesizer track called A Shadow in the City kicks in as Kersey stalks Jiver. Jimmy Page created some of these sounds by dragging a violin bow across the strings of an electric guitar. Jiver carries a Smith & Wesson Model 10 snub-nose revolver, aka a .38 Special, a very famous popular gun made in America. In the script at this point, Kersey got into a forklift, knocked some crates onto Jiver, and shot Jiver while he was pinned down. We see Bronson's stunt double with a fake mustache. Stuart K. Robinson went on to do voices for video games and became a motivational speaker and an acting instructor. In the documentary Confessions of a Superhero, you can see him giving tips to an actress playing Wonder Woman. Interestingly, Kersey fired that death shot with his left hand. The jump out the window and the running away was not done by Bronson. It was done by Ernie Orsatti, who was Bronson's stunt double on all of his Cannon movies, including Death Wish 3 and 4. He was slightly taller than Bronson, but he had the same build. The Taurus is played by James Begg. He did TV sitcom episodes and cartoon voices in the 1960s and 70s, including The Andy Griffith Show and several Disney features. He was the deputy in The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. He also produced some TV movies with Gary Coleman and produced the TV movie Thompson's Last Run, which was originally going to star Bronson, but ended up starring Robert Mitchum. The wife was played by Melody Santangelo, who had played the woman that Burt Reynolds wakes up with at the beginning of Seamus. She was one of the dancers in Newsies and Xanadu. As in the first Death Wish, the victims aided by Kersey refused to describe him to the police.
From where I was, he was a large black man with a red beard. Now, you let these guys get me to the hospital, or I'm going to give the press interviews you won't believe.
This sequel is structured like the first film. At exactly the 45-minute mark, the police realize that they're dealing with a vigilante.
Goddamn vigilante.
This police commissioner is a guest appearance by Anthony Franciosa from the TV series Name of the Game and Matt Helm in the movies Across 110th Street and Tenebrae. Winter had used him in Firepower, the movie he made just before this. The deputy commissioner is played by Drew Schneider, who played cops in a lot of 70s TV shows and was in the slasher movie Night School.
They'll knock off anyone with long hair or tacky clothes.
I think that I can find them.
If we even start an investigation, the press will hear of it. I learned half of what goes on in my own force from the newspapers. Tell me, wasn't there a vigilante in Boston about 5 years ago?
The commissioner says that the first film's events happened 5 years ago, but Kersey had said Carol's attack was 2 years ago.
It stopped there.
Now we're in New York. Originally, there was a bit more dialogue in the scene in Los Angeles, followed by some establishing shots of Inspector Ochoa walking into the office. As in the first film, Vincent Garcia as Ochoa appears exactly 45 minutes into the movie. This scene was actually shot in L.A., in the same office building that the previous scene was shot in. After the first Death Wish, Gardenia was on Broadway in Neil Simon's California Suite and movies like Winter's Firepower. J.D. Cannon, who plays the New York District Attorney, is best known for playing Dennis Weaver's superior on the 70s TV series McCloud. He was in Winter's movies Scorpio and Lawman. Paul Lambert, who plays the New York Police Commissioner, was in many TV episodes and played an orangutan minister in the original Planet of the Apes. From what we see in here, Kersey did not continue as a vigilante in Chicago, although the ending of the original Death Wish indicated that he would. This scene is a good example of Winter's directorial method. He didn't plan out his visuals prior to shooting a scene. He would decide on his camera angles when he got to each location. He would never shoot a full master shot, meaning he wouldn't shoot a scene all the way through from any one camera angle. He would only shoot small bits from each angle and would shoot only exactly what he knew he needed to cut the movie together. That way his movies could be shot very quickly, and the editing would also go fast because he had a limited amount of footage to choose from.
Well, I could go to Los Angeles and answer to their request, and I'll try to find out if Kersey's up to those tricks again. And if he is, I'll try to stop him. Quiet.
Kill him.
This scene originally ended with more dialogue. After the district attorney said kill him, the scene continued with Ochoa saying, "I don't think I heard that question, sir." And the police commissioner said, "And I don't think you asked him, Mr. District Attorney." Both of those office scenes originally flowed better both visually and dramatically, but late in the editing process, Winter decided to pick up the pace in the midsection of the film, and he made some trims. The edited moments did turn up in a VHS version released only in Greece, dubs of which have circulated on the collector's circuit. Reaction shots like this one, of Bronson that don't have other actors in the frame, were filmed first. Then Bronson would go home, and Winter and crew would film the images that Kersey was supposed to be looking at, like this drunk burping guy. The shot of the burping derelict was originally followed by a dinner scene between Kersey and Jerry at her apartment. Again, it was dropped late in the editing process to tighten the film's midsection. We hear more Page's music. For the Death Wish 2 score, Cannon had originally chosen Isaac Hayes, best known for Shaft. But Winter hired his next-door neighbor in London, the legendary Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page. After watching a rough cut of Death Wish 2 at Page's mansion, Page wrote and recorded the score at his own home studio on a 2-month deadline. Many vinyl copies of the soundtrack ended up in cutout bins, but the soundtrack later developed a cult following and became hard to find. In recent years, it was re-released via Page website on vinyl and CD with alternate tracks. This scene between Ochoa and Mankiewicz originally opened with Mankiewicz saying, "We heard rumors that you did get your vigilante." Ochoa is sneezing again. In the first film, Ochoa's sneeze was due to a cold in winter. In this film, it's due to the LA smog. Inspector Ochoa is skilled at breaking and entering. In the first movie, Ochoa had illegally searched Kersey's apartment.
How did you get in?
It comes with the job. You'd be amazed at the things they teach us.
Now, what's the New York cop doing breaking into my apartment?
About your friend, Mr. Paul Kersey.
How do you know it?
It comes with
The job.
He killed 9 people.
Ochoa says Kersey killed 9 people in New York 4 years ago. He actually killed 10 people 7 years ago. Ireland wears a wig in this movie, as she did in all of her films. Her wigs were always specially made and cut for her. She wears a different outfit in each scene of the movie. She chose each outfit herself, and like Bronson, got to keep her film wardrobe. Michael Winner had known Ireland since 1956, when they were both 19. He was writing for the British magazine Picture Goer and saw her on the cover. He got in touch with her agent and asked her out, and they had a brief, serious relationship. In 1971, Winner was trying to raise money for his western Chateau's land, and United Artists told him they'd finance the film if he could get Bronson to star. So he got in touch with Ireland again, and she put him in contact with her husband. Then Bronson insisted that Winner be hired as the director on his next 2 pictures, The Mechanic and The Stone Killer.
Come here and you tell me you think Paul's a murderer. What else are you entitled to tell me?
We think it would be better if he stopped. I asked him once. Didn't seem to work. I think maybe he'll listen to you.
I hardly ever see him outside of the radio station.
Doesn't it make you wonder what he may be doing at night?
Again, we see the vigilante's shadow. This quartet of girls in the background reminds me of the movie Foxes, which is about teen girls in L.A. This scene was originally preceded by Jerry in her apartment trying to reach Kersey by phone before going over there. That was another bit dropped to tighten the pace. Ireland got paid $75,000 for this movie, which was nothing compared to Bronson's $1.5 million fee, but it certainly helped to maintain their lavish lifestyle and large family. Bronson had 2 children from his first marriage, and Ireland had 2 sons and an adopted son with David McCallum. Bronson and Ireland had a daughter of their own, and all 6 of the kids live with them. Ireland has on cargo pants, which were popular at the time. Ireland's role here is the only Kersey love interest in a Death Wish movie that does not meet a brutal demise. Her character is never even put in jeopardy. All the scenes at Kersey's home were shot by Thomas Del Ruth. He was a camera assistant and operator for many years on major features before becoming a director of photography. Prior to Death Wish 2, Del Ruth was an Emmy-winning DP of TV movies. His only previous feature was Motel Hell, which had a budget similar to Death Wish 2 and had a similar sleazy look. He later did features like Stand By Me, and he worked with Bronson again on the TV movie Donato and Daughter. We see Bronson flailing his arms in this scene. He would do this frequently in movie scenes where his character was agitated. Bronson would always show up on the set prepared, with all of his lines memorized. Bronson and Ireland each had an assistant on the set who would read lines with them between scenes.
All I know, he might have accused every one of them. But he became such a damn pest that I left New York. But I'll be damned if I leave Los Angeles. I'm not going to let him come between you and me.
I thought things had
What?
come between us.
Hell no. Stay the night?
I thought you'd never ask. Do I get a key again?
There was a deleted bit of dialogue here with Kersey and Jerry realizing that they were being stalked by Ochoa. Again, many of the trim scenes ended up on a VHS released only in Greece. That Greek VHS also contained the rape scenes in their uncut form.
Now, who's keeping us apart?
This is the outside of KABC, an actual AM talk radio station in the Ladera Heights area of West LA. It was the station of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. It's still there and is now owned by Disney.
Could you do something for me tonight?
Ochoa's friend is played by Don Dubbins, a TV actor since the 1950s. Kersey became dependent on alcohol in the first film, but in this sequel, he's content to sip milk. In the first film, Kersey was able to evade Ochoa's surveillance. Here, Ochoa fools Kersey and is able to follow him. Rollerblading was a big trend at the time. The original script had Kersey and Ochoa riding on the San Francisco subway at this point, but in the film, Kersey travels by bus. Many of these exterior shots were filmed with existing light on high-speed film. Kersey is now armed with 2 pistols. We didn't see him buy any ammunition, but if he did fully load each gun, he has 21 rounds of ammo.
Hershey! Come on, will you? Follow that bus.
The cabbie is played by Don Moss, a bit part character actor.
When it moves, follow it.
We see Kersey get on bus 990. In the next shot, it changes to bus 99. Obviously, a different bus was used at this location.
What do we do now?
We wait.
Kersey is out looking for the 3 remaining rapists, and he finds them easily because the trio is dancing together out in the open. Once again, their boombox is playing a Jimmy Page instrumental. This time it's the song Hypnotizing Ways, which has vocals on the album. The script called for the trio to just be standing around, but when to decide to have them be dancing, and the actors choreograph their own moves. When we last saw Stomper and Jiver, they were seen hanging out with other guys. But we see Nirvana, Punk Cut, and Cutter are still working together. Nirvana, the guy with the hat, is played by Thomas F. Duffy. This is only his 3rd acting gig, after a TV movie and an episode of Chips. The pink sunglasses that Laurence Fishburne wears were found in a shop on Melrose Avenue by one of his fellow actors. Fishburne would reuse some of the mannerisms he created for this role when he played a similar character in King of New York. As the trio runs off, Jam Sandwich, the track heard when they were first introduced, plays on the boombox. When the thugs get on the bus, the track called The Chase begins. This is the longest piece of a continuous music in the entire movie.
I hope you got the bread for this.
This is police business.
I ain't known for my community spirit. Show me some money.
Here, start with this. Go ahead, will you?
Kersey is behind a newspaper, but he doesn't shoot anybody through it as he did in the first Death Wish. The villains obviously ditched the Chevy van that they had earlier because they are now using public transportation, much to the dismay of the other passengers. The nurse passenger was in the script, but the groping and sexual harassment of her character was all added by Winter. The nurse is played by Susanna Darrow. She was in Richard Rush's biker movie The Savage Seven and was on many TV shows, including 2 episodes of Night Gallery, and she was a regular on the soap opera Bright Promise. This was one of her last roles. She became a yoga instructor. According to the script, these guys are smoking angel dust again. The spray painting villain in the first Death Wish at least tried to paint swastikas and other designs, but Punk Cut is just interested in pure vandalism. The villains in Winter's 3 Death Wish movies are always one-dimensional, 100% evil. They were always low-life drug users who commit crimes constantly. The makers of Death Wish 4 and 5 made their villains more developed. They were involved with organized crime, and they were well-groomed. Bronson himself performed this jumping over the fence stunt.
What's down there?
Point Furman.
Like the cabbie says, this was filmed at Point Furman Park in the San Pedro area of Los Angeles.
There's nothing there this time of night.
The script called for this scene to be shot at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Whatever happens,
The poor cabbie ends up not getting the other half of Ochoa's $50 bill.
if you hear shooting, don't worry. It's just target practice.
This is another one of Winter's well-directed, well-edited action sequences. It was lit from overhead to simulate moonlight coming through the trees. And we see POV shots from Kersey's viewpoint as we saw earlier. These 2 actors with the car are not Bill, and I don't know who they are. The villains didn't choose a very secluded spot to be trading angel dust for weapons. Cutter takes 2 Smith & Wesson Model 29 revolvers, the type of gun famously used by Clint Eastwood in the Dirty Harry movies. The sniper up in the tree with the bolt-action rifle is played by Terry Leonard. He's an award-winning stuntman who had worked with Winter before on Firepower and with Bronson on Breakhart Pass. He's also a second-year director, and he directed Death Before Dishonor. He was involved with the stunts for some of the biggest movies of all time, and recently was involved with the Fast and the Furious and the Expendable movies. Nirvana starts out with a Mark 10, an American-made gun that holds 32 rounds. The same type gun was later used by the villain Fraker in Death Wish 3 and by Bronson in Death Wish 4 in the pawn shop sequence. Punk Cut uses a M16A1 rifle. That's the standard rifle of the US military and was later used by some of the villains in Death Wish 3 and 5. Nirvana switches to an Uzi submachine gun. The villains took cover behind the Cadillac, but Ochoa crouched right out in the open with no cover and got riddled with bullets. Cutter switches from holding the most powerful handgun in the world to holding a boombox. While David Engelbach was writing the script, he'd get interrupted by guys on roller skates with loud ghetto blasters. That's what gave him the idea for that death scene. Fishburne was later in many movies like The Matrix and was nominated for an Oscar for playing Ike Turner. And we see this 1972 Cadillac Fleetwood Eldorado get destroyed. Usually stunts and explosions would be handled by a second unit, but Winter directed all of this. Kersey holds one of his guns sideways in this sequence. This was the first movie I saw someone hold a gun like that. Screenwriter Engelbach was on the set the night this scene was filmed, and Gardenia asked him to come up with some dialogue for the character's final moments. Gardenia was 59 when this movie was made, the same age as Bronson. After this, Gardenia went on to do some of his best-known work. He was in Glengarry Glen Ross on Broadway, was in the movie version of Little Shop of Horrors, and was nominated for an Oscar for Moonstruck.
Oh, Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
I like Ben Frank's outfit here with the dark turtleneck and bell-bottoms. Frank was later in Hollywood Vice Squad, which covered some of the same locations as Death Wish 2. In later years, he did some memorabilia shows and sold autographed Death Wish 2 photos of himself with Bronson.
Who blew away the car? Who did it?
No sign of a cab had called in. Cab service said that he was just passing by. He didn't see anything.
They just want to stay out of trouble.
Listen, you're gonna die right here if I don't hear who killed that cop.
A few years after this film was made, Elamon Johnson died of AIDS.
Nevada! Charles Wilson!
Put out a tracer on Nirvana, also known as Charles Wilson, for murder.
The ambulance man who covers the body is played by Paul McCallum, the son of Jill Ireland and David McCallum. Bronson later got this stepson cast as the pot-smoking lab technician in 10 to Midnight. He also had bits with Bronson in Murphy's Law as one of the drug-dealing bikers, and An Act of Vengeance and Assassination. He composed some of the music for Murphy's Law and Death Wish 4. On this Blu-ray, you can see the detail and texture on Bronson's jacket and shirt.
Why don't you ask your wife about it?
In the early script drafts, when Kersey was written as the manager of the station, there was a scene where Kersey was encouraging his co-workers to not give any airtime to the vigilante.
Well, do you know what time they're going to make their move? Uh-huh. Well, thanks, Sergeant. Will you please keep those calls coming in? All right.
Hi, Fred. What's happening?
Well, there was a big shootout last night at Point Fermin down San Pedro. There were 5 people killed.
His character says that 5 people were killed at the shootout, but there were actually 6. After this movie, Lyons didn't work with Winter again, but he stayed friends with Bronson, who requested that Lyons be cast in 10 to Midnight and Murphy's Law. His later movies included Cannon's Platoon Leader with Michael Dudikoff. He still acts today, and he's also an acting instructor.
Happen to have a spare one lying around?
There was one that we were going to get rid of. Here, we got better ones now, but this one still works pretty well. A gift from KABC Radio. Now, the Tax Squad, they operate on this band, and they identify with 3A90. And the truth is, the programs are a lot more interesting than ours.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you, Charlie, available, and we'll handle. Charlie, that's 2/97, apartment 4. 3A68, subject's residence located as 914 Fillmore. Units moving into position.
5H13, this is 3A90. We can use a definite 1020.
Affirmative, 914 Fillmore. Stay clear. No units to move in till I give the word.
Squad 3 moving into position. Over.
These cops have federal L5 riot guns. Those are used to fire tear gas and rubber bullets, but these cops never fire them in the movie.
We're across the street from the 1020. Can take him now. Hold it, he's mine. Standing by. 389. This is 5C61. Subject just entered 1020 with 2 exits. 3846, subject lighting object appears to be narcotics. Permission to move in. Negative. I don't want those women involved. Wait till he comes out.
George, you got a cigarette?
Kersey in the Alley was shot on the same day and in the same area as the earlier scene where Kersey chased Jiver down an alley. Kersey has taken a big risk by wearing his vigilante disguise in daylight. Bronson did not perform the jump off the roof, but he did perform the roll on the ground.
Someone just jumped onto the roof of 914. Confirm it was one of us. Over.
How the hell do I know who it is? Hold your position.
The song Big Band, Sax and Violence is coming from Nirvana's room. This track was going to be released as a single, but for some reason it wasn't. Kersey is only packing his Beretta from now on. Kersey gets slashed on the left arm. In the first film, he was slashed on the left shoulder. We see Leslie Graves topless. This is the final pair of breasts seen in the film. I'm not sure if that is a real stun gun or a prop made for the movie. It looks the same as the stun gun used on the mayor in the Clint Eastwood movie The Enforcer. Thomas F. Duffy had a stuntman for many of these shots. On Blu-ray, you can slow down and freeze frame to see where the stuntman was used.
Okay, fellas, let's get it. Come on, hold on.
Kersey is apparently watching from the window where Nirvana's topless girlfriend is. Kersey has to tend to his own wound as he did in the first film. We see Ireland here in jeans. This is another scene shot by Thomas Del Ruth. The original Death Wish was distributed in the U.S. by Paramount Pictures, but the sequel was released in America by Filmway Pictures, which had recently merged with American International Pictures, the legendary exploitation outfit that specialized in genre films like Death Wish 2. When Filmway submitted Death Wish 2 to the MPAA for a rating, the film was giving an X rating because of the graphic rape scenes. Filmways had recently distributed Dress to Kill, which also had to be trimmed of sex and violence to avoid an X.
Well, at least they caught the man that killed him. See you later.
Prosecution has presented only circumstantial evidence that Charles Wilson was the person that shot and killed Detective Frank Ochoa on the night of May 14th.
This judge is played by Frank Campanella, another TV bit actor. Death Wish 2 was a fairly low-budget movie, and most of the actors worked for scale. The cast is mostly made up of young newcomers and older veterans of TV bit parts.
was remanded to the McLaren State Hospital until such time as the medical examination...
Kersey has the same style reading glasses as he had in the original Death Wish. But in the first film, he wore a print bathrobe.
This is the Dr. Clark that's going to turn him into a little angel.
Would a normal prison do any better?
Despite what she saw happen to Carol and Rosario, Jerry is still opposed to the traditional prison system.
When's it come out?
Well, I've got a couple more sessions at the hospital. It's due to go in the July issue.
You really believe all this?
Yes, I do. And you might too if you heard Clark.
You think he could swing me over?
Well, if you met him, you might learn something.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
Ireland is seen here driving one of her own personal vehicles, a 1966 Chevrolet Corvette. That McLaren Hospital sign is a mock-up. That was not the real name of this building. We see Ireland here in a purple pantsuit. Dr. Clark is played by the German actor Stefan Zacharias. Before relocating to Hollywood, Zacharias had small roles in many European movies of the 60s and 70s, including They Call Me Trinity, Return of Sabata, and The Violent Professionals. Death Wish 2 was Winter's least favorite of his 3 Death Wish films, but he still liked it, especially the fact that Kersey got to kill those that had actually assaulted his family. Winter saw each of his Death Wish movies as dark comedies, but when Bronson saw the completed Death Wish 2, he was extremely upset and angry at Winter because of how graphic the rape scenes were. Winter said that of the 6 movies he made with Bronson, the western Chato's Land was the only one that Bronson liked. Kersey has to make his fake name tag using whiteout and the company Xerox machine. Today he could easily make one at home with a scanner. Here Kersey wears a black leather jacket, similar to the one he wears in Death Wish 3. This scene was filmed at the famous Yamashiro Japanese restaurant in Hollywood. I believe it just recently closed. The Asian-like music we hear is not on the Jimmy Page soundtrack, because Page had nothing to do with this piece. The music here was actually written by David Sinclair Whitaker, a British composer who had done the music for some of the Hammer horror movies and had conducted the score for Winter's Lawman. For Death Wish 2, Whitaker rearranged some of Page's pieces and prepared them for an orchestra.
Dom Perignon? Enjoy your Can't be my birthday. That was last month. And you forgot? But that's all right.
Will you marry me?
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious.
You're not sick?
Might be after I see the check, but I feel fine now. Easy, easy. This stuff costs $3 a drop. That was a $9 kiss.
I accept. That'll teach you.
You can see a dark sky and the wind blowing in the background. A storm was coming up when this scene was filmed.
And I thought you weren't a romantic.
After the program, you'd drive to my place. Then off we go.
Let's get smashed. Then I wanted it writing.
Death Wish 2 opened on February 20th, 1982 in the U.S., where it was the top-grossing movie for 2 weeks. In New York, it grossed $1 million in its first 3 days. In England, Death Wish 2 also stayed at number 1 for 2 weeks. The New York Times called it even more foolish, more tacky, and more self-righteously inhumane than the original. New York Daily News said, Bronson shows all the emotion of a cigar store Indian. Winter is a director clearly willing to sink to any level to appeal to an audience's baser instincts. Cynical trash. As Kersey drives by the guardhouse, the guard is distracted by an angry nurse, allowing Kersey to avoid security. Kersey parks in a handicapped space here. Obviously, the crew didn't intend for the handicapped notice to be seen. A Pennsylvania critic wrote, Death Wish 2 has absolutely no atmosphere and creates no mood, except nausea. The controversial conservative columnist Joseph Sobran, who loved the original movie, wrote, Death Wish 2 is extremely brutal. You'll sit there watching these horrible crimes and wondering why they have to make movies so violent. And suddenly it will hit you. The real thing is worse.
Excuse me. Looking for a patient, Charles Wilson?
This nurse is played by Teresa Baxter. She was in a few TV shows, including James at 16.
Yes, C block, section 6, room 30. It's that way.
The orderly is played by Charles Cyphers. He previously worked with Bronson in Borderline, and he was a regular in many John Carpenter movies of this era, including Halloween and Escape from New York.
My appointment is for 9 o'clock.
Well, they usually give me a list with doctors coming through.
I was told that Mr. K would be here on duty.
Well, that's me, but I can't let you through on this.
Well, Mr. K, I'm already late. I'd like to finish up and get back home to dinner. Now, if you don't mind, would you please show me to room 30?
This nurse is played by Cindy Daly. She was in the 1970s movies The Black Six, Coach, Big Wednesday, and Carrie, and she played the three-fingered typist in Beetlejuice. Charles Cyphers recalled that Bronson would constantly eat sunflower seeds to control his craving for a cigarette. Effectively, this upcoming fight scene has no music.
Do you want to use the interview room here or see him in the cell?
This will do. What's all that back there?
Well, that's the electroshock room. Since you fellas took over, they don't use it very much. It's all done with kindness now. Isn't that right, Doctor?
Therapy.
Call it what you like. Okay, Wilson, you got a visitor. Let's go. You know the routine. You want me to stay?
It's not necessary.
Oh, if you need me, just pull this. I'll get my dinner.
Prior to the fight, the script had some dialogue that wasn't shot. Nirvana said, "Which bit of my mind you looking for, Doc?" Kersey said, "I just want to help." And Nirvana said, "Ain't I seen you before?"
My wife, where do you want to go for your anniversary? She says, I want to go somewhere I've never been before. I said, try the kitchen.
The script had Kersey kick Nirvana during the fight and say, "For my daughter." Stuntman Ernie Osati, with a fake mustache, stood in for Bronson in some of these shots, including the head smash into the glass. As in the first film, Kersey is stabbed in the left shoulder. It is actually Bronson who did the punch that knocks down Nirvana. Bronson had his own recognizable style of punch. He would effectively twist his hips and put all of his weight into the punch. The electroshock machine was a prop specially made for the film. Obviously, an electric fan was blown on Duffy to simulate an electric shock. The death was more brutal in the script. Kersey was to stab Nirvana in the neck with 2 spiked electrical contacts before turning on the machine. Thomas F. Duffy still acts. He's done a lot of TV episodes and had small roles in big movies like Independence Day and Super 8.
He raped and killed my daughter.
I read about it. I'll give you 3 minutes.
The orderly believes that Nirvana's murder was justified. He obviously represents how the movie's target audience feels about Kersey. Kersey picks up his Beretta Model 84 9mm pistol. We won't see that type of gun in any of the later Death Wish entries. As Kersey left, the script had the orderly saying, "You manage the radio station, don't you? I may be out of a job soon." The orderly said 3 minutes, but he actually only gave Kersey about 1 minute and a half. Kersey bandages his left shoulder with a huge wad of cotton as he did in the original film. We won't see the Skid Row room again. A script draft of Death Wish 4 had an early scene with Kersey wearing the same disguise and operating out of the same Skid Row hotel, but that scene was dropped from the final script. Maybe these rough-looking characters that banged on Kersey's car are the victims referred to on the radio later, when it is announced that a vigilante is still loose. The original script for Death Wish 4 reunited Kersey with the Jerry character and had him seeking vengeance on the gang members that murder her. But that script wasn't used, and we never saw her character again. After Death Wish 2, Ireland acted once more with Bronson in the Cannon production Assassination, and she co-produced the Bronson movies The Evil That Men Do and Murphy's Law. She passed away from cancer in 1990. This music track we hear is Jill's theme, named after the actress, not her character. This music was written by Page on guitar and then arranged into a full orchestra piece. Kersey is obviously in a hurry because he parks in a spot clearly labeled as no parking. If he did go on the trip with Jerry, it would have been difficult for him to explain the stab wounds on his shoulder.
KABC radio news for Tuesday, October the 10th. At a press conference this morning,
The radio announces 2 murders and speculates that the vigilante is still loose. Kersey smiles at the news. The script had the radio also announcing that the orderly was fired for letting a fake doctor into the hospital, but after an inquiry, he was given his job back. If we count the 2 murders announced on the radio, Kersey killed 12 people in this movie.
I know Jerry's going must have hit you. Have you been drinking?
Hey, you know better than that.
Where the hell have you been at night? I've called you dozens of times.
Oh, well, I don't often answer the phone. It rings, sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't, but I'm fine.
Betty's giving a new building party next Thursday. We'd like you to join us.
I'll be there.
You sure you're free?
What else will you be doing? We see the vigilante one last time, but only as a shadow. Kersey has been touched by so much violence that he has lost all of his humanity and is nothing but a dark shadow. This instrumental track called The Release was intended by Page to be the piece that opened the film. Bronson and Winter reunited one last time for Death Wish 3, which brought Kersey back to New York City, although much of it was filmed in London. Bronson worked with different directors when he did Death Wish 4 The Crackdown, which brought Kersey back to LA, and Death Wish 5 The Face of Death, which took Kersey back one final time to New York City, although it was filmed in Toronto. In this end credits sequence, we see Diane Markoff credited for playing a prostitute, although almost all of her role was cut. At the time, Markoff had a semi-regular role as a waitress on the TV series Quincy M.E., and there was a popular pinup poster of her in a red swimsuit. In Death Wish 2, you can see her for a split second outside the Pioneer Chicken, where she is talking a payphone and wearing red shorts and a black lace top. Also credited here is Cynthia Burr for playing a secretary, but her role was cut entirely from the film at the last minute. Her secretary bit can be seen in the Greek videotape. For many years, the uncut version of Death Wish 2 was very difficult, if not impossible, to find. My name is Paul Talbot. I'm the author of the books Bronson's Loose and Bronson's Loose Again. I want to thank Shout Factory for releasing the uncut Death Wish 2 Holy Grail on Blu-ray, and for letting me provide the commentary.